welcome. I'm so excited you've tuned into the Sacred Gut Punch podcast, the place of authentic stories, real breakthroughs, endless possibilities. I'm Dr. Tomi Bryan, recording from Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm a coach and consultant in human and organizational performance and the creator of Emotional Intelligence 3.0, a system for achieving extraordinary performance. Since this is the first episode of Sacred Gut Punch, and I'm just so excited. I don't know. I wonder if I'm oozing that excitement. I hope I am, because I'm just thrilled to be here with you. But since this is the first episode, I'll share the inspiration behind the name of the podcast. And it's connected to three particular moments in my life. The first one is what my dad said to my mom and my three siblings and me while we were growing up. Now, my dad was a boxer in the military. The legend of Tom White is that he went 27-0 in boxing while in the military service. He had enough history after getting out of the military to sort of live what it meant to have been a boxer. And what he told us is no matter how many times you get knocked down, you have to get back up because the next punch is coming. Get up, or as my friend Mel says, rise. I like rise a little better than get up, right? Get up, people, as opposed to rise. The second moment is from December 2023. About 2 years ago, my personal trainer convinced me to start weightlifting. And then he wanted us to do a competition. And these competitions usually include 3 lifts: deadlift, squat, and bench press. And because I have bad knees, I usually only do the bench press. Lord, if I squatted, we may never get me back up. So I had to opt out of that. But we decided to do a competition, and the first one is in December of 2023. And the bench press is the middle lift. So I have to wait for everybody to do their first lift and 3 rounds of it before we get to the bench press. Now we're in an enclosed space. There's death metal blasting through speakers throughout the whole facility. There's lots of skin that I'm not used to. Skin is everywhere. And the MC is shouting names and lift results into a microphone, right? So all these things are coming at me. And like I said, I'm overwhelmed. Finally, my name is called. And as soon as I step on the platform, I heard in my head, Tomi, process it all through the gut. I get choked up about this moment. As I lay on the bench for my first competitive lift, I focused on my gut, something I'd never done before. And I'm an old athlete. So it was interesting to hear that voice break through all the noise to tell me that. All the noise went away. It was just me and the bar. And I crushed that lift. 3 green lights. My trainer said he almost cried. It was so beautiful. So I became enamored with the gut. The third moment came when I was sitting in a circle of leadership colleagues at a retreat. My dear friend Jerry told the story of some early acting advice Michael Caine received. He was preparing for a play and he was supposed to walk on stage through a door, but a chair was blocking the door so he couldn't get on stage. It was his turn to enter the stage. He kind of opens the door a little bit, leans in. He says, "Hey, I can't get in." At that moment, someone else said, "Michael, use the difficulty. If it's a comedy, trip over the chair and make people laugh. If it's a drama, pick up the chair and smash it. Use the difficulty." So when these 3 things came together for me, I've been fascinated by the gut, how it absorbs what's going on and redistribute it across the body meaningfully as we figure out how to use the difficulty so we can rise. To me, it's a sacred process. I wanted to explore the stories of others and how they had risen after a gut punch. And out of those 3 experiences was born the idea for the name of the podcast, The Sacred Gut Punch. And with that as a backdrop, let's jump right to our first guest, a dear, wonderful friend, Carolyn Leisure. Carolyn and I have been working together for about 4 years. And she's the gifted designer behind the Emotional Intelligence 3.0 website. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for having me. I love every time we get to chat together and work together, and I'm so honored and excited to be the first guest on Sacred Gut Punch.
It is my privilege to have you here. And what I'm curious about, Carolyn, for you is what is your story of the Sacred Gut Punch?
It was so interesting for me to think about the moment of having a Sacred Gut Punch because my story is so much of a longer experience of that moment. And when I think about the actual moment, it's so quiet.
Ah,
So, of the transformation of realizing when I had to have that reimagining of my life, it was a really quiet moment, but everything that led up to it was so tumultuous.
well, that's what I was going to ask you. Was it all this crazy stuff that happened and then this moment of silence where you're like,
everything has to change.
Everything has to change.
And it was really a decision of listening to myself and deciding everything has to change. So, and really, it's a story of chronic illness and parenthood and solopreneurship, all kind of converging and making that decision that I have to make some changes in my life. And the chronic illness starts when I was a child and not understanding, and our health system not understanding what was going on with me, and not really paying attention to what was going on with me. But I opened my first business when probably in 2011. I worked in food and beverage my whole life, and I opened an artisanal cheese shop and wine bar. I'd worked in artisanal cheese for years, and I was so excited to open my first business. I had no business background, so I had no business being in business, but I love food and wine. I love cheese. I love telling the stories of all the farmers that I worked with and telling the stories of the land and helping people find what they're looking for and making cheese really accessible. And I loved everything about it, but I got caught up in all the sides of owning a business and that you don't expect when you've never opened a business before.
So, Carolyn, yeah, I was going to say, can I halt you there for a second? I talk about the business of business. There's doing the business, and then there's the business of the business. And what you're talking about, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that business of the business was the part you might not have been as well prepared for as you wanted.
Yes. And I think that happens with a lot of solopreneurs. There's all these platforms that are DIY and you can do it yourself, but you don't necessarily know how and you don't know the strategy behind it. So when I opened my business, that was the year that Instagram started. And so all of a sudden I was doing social media marketing and I was doing PR, getting interviewed all the time. And I was having to negotiate my lease with the help of an attorney, of course, but I had to know about it. And I was working with all these, government regulations, and I was hiring people and writing all of my handbooks, and I was building my website, and I was every single bit of running a business that you don't necessarily know about. And when you're doing it all by yourself, there's a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of Band-Aid solutions. There's a lot of Googling. And I was lucky enough that my business was busy straight out the gate. So I was exhausted. It was taking me away from what I call purposeful passion.
So can we stop? We stop right there. I don't want to miss what you just said.
That's one of my core business values.
The beautiful statement of purposeful passion. Tell us a little more about that, if you don't mind.
Part of working with you has taught me a lot about core values. And one of my core business
this
values
is not about me. It's about you.
is purposeful passion. I realize that time and energy are some of our most limited resources. Probably for me, my most limited resources are time and energy. And I think for a lot of people. And I think that the way we spend those resources has to be very intentional and is so important. So purposeful passion to me is spending your time doing what lights you up in a way that has meaning, whatever that meaning is to a person. And for work, for me, that's important in multiple ways, both what brings me joy, what helps me learn, what provides value to other people and to my community. I think the purpose can be different for different people. And that's what provides purpose for me. And when I was in my first business, doing some of the work of being on the business took me away from what was purposeful, what drew me to my work in the first place, and was exacerbating my health problems.
Can you articulate for us? I think you now know what was wrong, but it took a long time to get to the
Yes.
diagnosis. Do you mind
Yes.
sharing?
I'm happy to. And it's still learning new things, even as of a few months ago. It's been a process. This was, again, in 2011. I was newly diagnosed with something else in October. So it's an ongoing process that where I'm learning all the time. I think that happens for a lot of women in around my age. I'm 45 now. There were a lot of things that weren't understood, especially when the health system looks at things from the male perspective. So I have been now at this stage of my life been diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos, POTS, which is a dysautonomia diagnosis, which means your body has trouble regulating itself, and ADHD. A lot of this at the time was through the lens of chronic migraine. So there's a lot of triggers. I've had migraines since the age of 5. I was 5
Wow.
when I had my first
Oh my
migraine.
gosh.
They weren't diagnosed until I was in my 20s, and I wasn't able to go on medication until I was in my mid 20s. Around the time that I started my cheese shop, I got married a few years later to my wonderful husband now. He also at the time
Yay.
worked in food and beverage. He was a chef. And then we started trying to have kids. So I had to go off my migraine meds at some point. Then we had our first child, who's now 8. It was actually the process of getting him diagnosed with ADHD, because my husband also has ADHD, that led to my ADHD diagnosis, which we can talk about later. But which happens again a lot for a lot of moms who get their kids diagnosed with ADHD, and they're like, "Oh no, those are totally normal things." Oh,
Yeah.
oh, wait a second,
Yeah.
which is exactly what happened to me.
Well, and Carolyn, that happened with my son Shep.
Oh,
He started trying to understand his neurodiversity, and he did a deep dive on autism and the that whole spectrum. And he calls me up one day, and this was maybe 2 years ago, right? I'm 60, so I was 58 at the time. And he calls me up and he goes, Mom, I've been researching this, and I think it's not just me. And he starts telling me about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
mm-hmm,
Shep, now I know where you get it from.
mm-hmm.
Those are the things that I do when I get a hold of an idea, I can't let it go.
Right.
Right. So
Yep.
I think, Carolyn, that a lot of us have experienced that in some way about right searching for the answers for your child reveals
Yep.
the answers for you.
Yes, and I hear that story so often, especially with moms, because there's the hyper. I don't have hyperactivity, but my husband does. My son does. It's just manifested. It manifests differently a lot of times in girls.
Right.
So, at the time, there was a moment that I actually, if you sign up for my email list, you'll get this in one of my welcome series. There's a moment where I think my business at this point was probably 6 years old. I had a staff of, I think, 9 people. It was bananas, very busy. And my son was, I want to say 9 months old, and we lost our nanny. So I was providing full-time childcare and running my business. And my husband was working 13 hours a day because he was a chef, but my son was only sleeping about 3 hours a night, and it was in multiple chunks because he had trouble sleeping. Part again related to ADHD.
I see the S emerging on your chest, right? Superwoman.
And I was having migraines all the time. I mean, it was really horrible. I was really sick. Oh, and also when I was pregnant with him, I was being hospitalized every few weeks for days at a time and trying to
Oh
run my business. It
gosh.
was really bad. So it was an ongoing process when this was happening. And when I was running my business and pregnant and then had him, it was really difficult. I was really sick all the time. And when this happened, when I was not sleeping and my husband was working all the time, and I mean, it wasn't his fault. He was a chef. This is what the industry expected. And we didn't have childcare. That's when my manager, who I relied on to run the actual day to day, gave his notice.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, this is not working for me. I can't do this. When I was running a business now, cheese shops and this food industry is a little bit more common, but at the time it was not a normal thing. People would come to me to work for me, and I had to train from the ground up. It had to be me doing it. No one knew how to do any of this. So it really required a lot of me to teach them everything they knew. So I did change the business a little bit at that point. We decided to move to where we live now, which is a little bit of a less stressful environment. So that was the first step in changing our lives a little bit to make it more sustainable for me and my family. And then we decided to have a second child. I don't know why we decided that in all of this. It sounds crazy now, but I really wanted to have a second child, but our family didn't feel complete to me.
Right.
And I was able, I changed the cheese shop model enough that I was able to run it from afar. And my husband left his job when he moved so he could help me do this. And I went off migraine meds again. I got really sick again in order to have a child, but it was working very well because we were able to run the business from afar, all this. So at that moment, I was experiencing a lot of pregnancy loss throughout this whole time. And now we know that's related to having Ehlers-Danlos.
Oh,
At the
wow.
time, I wasn't diagnosed with this, so we didn't know why all this was happening. A lot of other things were happening. I had an issue with my wrist that I had to have surgery on. Now we know this is related to Ehlers-Danlos. At the time, all these random things kept happening that weren't making sense, like the pregnancy losses, the migraines, the issue with my wrist.
So Carolyn, I just want to stop for a second though, because I feel like there might be a lot of people listening who've experienced sort of these random things and no one is able to connect the dots.
I want to also say that throughout my whole childhood, I was hypermobile. There were other things happening too that if I had ever told a doctor the whole list of things, it would have sounded crazy.
Ah. So wait, but let's stop right there. You said they would have thought you were crazy. Was that a fear that if you said everything out loud?
It wasn't a fear. There were just so many that like it never would have made sense to me to put all these random things together. There were times when I would go to physical therapy and the physical therapist would say, "Do you have Ehlers-Danlos?" And I'd say, "I don't know.
Uh,
Do I?" You tell me. It's a rare disease. It's a connective tissue disorder. And it's very uncommon. So there's an adage in the medical industry that says, when you hear hoofbeats, it's not a zebra, it's a horse. But the animal that they use to represent Ehlers-Danlos is a zebra. Because in this case, it is a zebra. It's a very unusual thing. So I did at some point when I was pregnant with my second child and I had to have the surgery on my wrist and I tore my rotator cuff and all these things were going on. I said, "Do I have Ehlers-Danlos?" She says, "You don't have Ehlers-Danlos. It's so uncommon. The chances of you having this are very rare." So I had never told her all of the things that to me made sense that I had this disorder. So I realized I had to close my business because at this point, I was so sick. I couldn't really work.
oh my.
And I had built up a national reputation. I was in something called the Guilde de Fromager. I was inducted in the French embassy. It's
Wow.
an international organization. I had, articles written in national magazines about my, cheese and wine knowledge. I had, was interviewed on different shows and my ego was involved in my business. I'd worked really hard. There were very few shops that, did what I did. I spoke on panels at the national conference every year in my industry, but I wasn't able to work in a way that supported my family and my health.
Well, I just want to stop there because that just feels devastating.
It does, but at the time, I was in such pain and I was so sick that it didn't at the time. At the time, I just was so tired and sick that I was like, I cannot do this anymore. So the enormity of it didn't affect me.
Well, my friend Evelyn says exhaustion will be your best friend. And it sounds like you were exhausted.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think when you're in that much constant pain, it just overrides everything else. It's a struggle.
Well, it doesn't leave emotional energy for anything else.
Yeah. And you'll do anything to make it stop.
Well,
You'll just do anything.
you mentioned your ego was involved. Like, what beliefs or certainties did you have to let go of to make space for your good health?
I think it came later. I think at the time when I walked away, it was just make it stop.
Mm.
And I think that was the quiet moment that came later.
Okay.
I think that when finally I was better, when finally I was able to take care of my health, I just would do anything to make it stop. And when I was able to take care of my health and get better later, I was like, okay, I like living my life with purposeful passion. I was in a different city. I love teaching about cheese and wine. I love teaching. I love doing cheese and wine classes. I liked helping people who felt intimidated feel very, I guess, approachable. So I started to get involved here in this new area with people that I knew, but I couldn't make myself do it. I was like dragging my feet. And that quiet moment came from finally saying, like, why am I not doing this thing? I love doing this. Why am I not actually spending time doing it? And then I said, oh, I am burnt out. I have to leave this behind. So now what? What do I do now? So I think that I had to just let go of that person that I was before entirely in terms of my career.
Well, that's a big space of uncertainty, though.
Yes. Yes. And so the ego that was involved with that career, I had to let go of that certainty and saying, that is not me. That was my career. I am not what I do for work. Who am I instead?
Well, and I love what you teased out there. And I think I don't want to miss the power and meaning in that. You just made this beautiful distinction. I am not what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us forget that. What was your process for being able to separate and tease out? This is something I do. This is not who I am.
Mm. I think that I started, I looked at it very logically. I looked at what did I enjoy about the actual day to day? Like, what did I enjoy about the specific things of what I did instead of all of those accolades we just talked about, which were nice, but they had no impact on my day to day life. And to get very metaphysical, people have different ideas about what happens when we're gone, but I like to live my life for while I'm here.
Right? Wow.
And so my day-to-day life is very important. How I spend the actual minutes of my life matter. So what did I enjoy about how I spent the minutes of my life at work? What did I not enjoy? What did I like about working with people? In what ways do I want to work with people? In what ways do I not want to work with people? In what ways what those types of things. And so I refashioned a career for myself based on those particulars. I was very logical about it.
So Maypop Creative Studio, which is
Mm-hmm.
what you do now, is
Mm-hmm.
really, I don't want to say you cherry picked.
Oh yeah, I did. I
But
cherry picked. I said I don't want to manage people anymore. I don't want to have a team. Yeah, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, by the way.
yeah.
But yeah, when I started too, I did a lot more. I also realized I wasn't hireable because I don't like working for people. So I will not
Oh,
white label.
Carolyn, my husband regularly says I'm unemployable.
Yes, I'm very unemployable. Yeah. I
So I get
also,
that.
I should say, looking at a sacred gut punch, I started my business November 2019. I had my second baby March 26, 2020. A week
Wow.
after my husband lost his job from the pandemic and we lost childcare for our first child.
Oh gosh.
And so I had to go back to work when my second kid was about 3 weeks old.
Wow.
And we were all in our house together. We had no childcare for a while. It was a booming time for online business, though. So my services were very much in need. So that kind of changed the trajectory of what I was doing. When I first started Maypop Creative Studio, I was doing a lot of event planning because I had done so many classes and events. Events
Right.
stopped
Yes.
right away.
Yes.
So, and I had a lot more work than I could handle at the beginning. And I was able to say, okay, people are coming to me for operations. I don't like doing operations. I'm not going to do that. So I was able to cherry pick in a lot of ways. But I also was able to think about the experiences that I had being that overwhelmed solopreneur and say, I want to help other people who are in my situation because I know what that feels like and help them move through those. I mean, not necessarily through the chronic illness or through the new parenthood, but create systems that work for them to create more freedom for them in their own businesses. And so that's where I did.
Yeah, I love your thought process for doing that, right? What am I not going to do? What doesn't feed my soul? What does feed my
Hmm.
soul? And so I'm curious, do you consider yourself resilient as you look back on this what I call forced march to change your life?
I do. I think resilience is something that's incredibly important to me. Even before this major change happened, to be completely transparent, I'd gone through multiple pregnancy losses. Each time, like you said, you get punched down, you have to rise up, and I'd have to go back into the shop and work, see lots of people, and they wanted to see me and be cheerful. And there's a lot of uncertainty in that time. And to be able to find peace in that uncertainty, or to, not peace, it's not the right word, but to find a way to find strength
Mhm.
and move through that uncertainty was important.
Right. My dad said, get knocked down 7, get up 8. And that's what I hear
Mm-hmm.
you saying is that, when I got knocked down, I just got back up.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we're talking about all the resiliency and letting go of your ego, that prepared me for parenting the kids that I have. Because as you know, both of my kids are neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And my second has a type of autism that is not recognized in the US DSM. It is in UK
You were.
and Australia and Canada.
Mhm.
And it requires completely letting go of your ego and allowing him to feel a lot of autonomy and equality, which is not standard parenting.
Yeah, well, what I hear you saying is having to let go of your ego when you let go of the cheese shop prepared you to be able to stand side by side with this beautiful being you brought into the
Hmm.
world with his unique personality. And how lovely is that?
It really is, but it's very day to day, incredibly difficult, and the resiliency that I need to teach my kids, and the resiliency that's required of me and my husband every day to manage his school, you know, just working with him, with each other in our marriage.
Right.
That is a regular lesson that I'm learning every day.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
is there a poem or a prayer or a mantra or a song or a story that made a difference for you as you made this journey of rebuilding who you thought you were?
Yes. So it's really interesting. When I was a creative writing major in school,
Oh,
in
wow.
college, and I was on as an editor, and my third career is going to be as a writer. I have a book that I'm writing right now.
I
It's going to be
love
when I'm
it.
in my 60s. And so a book that I was assigned in college and never read was Letters to a Young Poet by Rainier Mario Rilke. But I did read it when I was traveling around Europe as a post-college student and loved it, and it meant a lot to me. And then I reread it, I think after my first pregnancy loss, and different parts of it meant something really important to me. And then I reread it during a particularly difficult time after my second child was born, and I went away on a retreat to learn to play the Himalayan singing bowls, which I now play on a regular basis
Love
to
it.
regulate my nervous system. It's a
Mhm.
really important practice for me in my healthcare. So, from that book, my favorite passage that I always recall whenever, I can have anxiety when we have to make a decision and the path is really unclear, which happens to all of us all of the time. So, and it can stay that way for a long time. For right now, we're trying to figure out schools for our kids for next year. And this path has been unclear for months. And sometimes the
Oh,
path can be
gosh.
unclear for years for something. And
Right.
it's a really hard place to live. So, this is the passage that really helps me during those times. It's a long passage, so bear with me. From Letters to a Young Poet. I should like to ask you, as best I can, dear sir, to be patient towards all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves like locked rooms, like books written in a foreign tongue. Do not now strive to uncover answers. They cannot be given to you because you have not been able to live them. And what matters is to live everything. Live the questions for now. Perhaps then you will gradually, without noticing it, live your way into the answer, one distant day in the future.
That is so beautiful.
It is something that I need to be reminded of regularly, to just live the questions, and then eventually I will live my way into the answer instead of trying to force it.
I'm trying not to tear up here. My children say I'm a big crybaby. It's okay. I have known you for a couple of years, and that is actually what I have watched you do. You just continue to live the question and let it work you until you get to the answer. And it's been a beautiful privilege to watch you do that.
Thank you, Tomi.
Yes. Well, Carolyn, what a lovely gift to me and now to our listeners to share in your experiences today. And thank you for opening your heart and your wisdom to us. It's just been delightful to spend this time with you.
It's always an honor to talk with you, Tomi. Thank you.
I know we love hanging out together, don't we? We make
Yes.
we make a business call and it's 5 minutes of business and 55 minutes of other stuff.
I always learn so much from you.
Well, likewise, it's mutual. I want to express my gratitude to our sponsors who make this podcast possible, the EI 3.0 companies, Bryan Insights and the Center for Emotional Wellbeing. And of course, to my husband, attorney Jim Bryan. Thank you, Jim, for your endless support. Love you to the moon and back, Jimmy. All right, until next time, dear ones, may you use the difficulty as you rise with grace. If you're experiencing a sacred gut punch, remember, while you may feel alone, you are not alone. Help is out there. If you or someone you know is in crisis and considering suicide or self-harm, please seek support. Call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. And if you're not in the United States, find a helpline in your country with Befrienders worldwide at befrienders.org. Your well-being is important to us.